All right. So, welcome everybody. Today's video is going to be about how to support an extreme torture survivor's healing. Super fun time. I am the torture survivor, and over the past like 6 to 7 years, I've kind of been documenting my own healing journey, and I want to share with others what it's been like and the cycles that have emerged because there is a definite pattern to the healing that I'm experiencing, and hopefully this will make it like less scary and a little more intuitive for other people that have gone through what I have or people trying to support other people that have gone through what I have. And it's not like, oh my god, I'm screwed because I have all these issues going on at the same time. So, the first thing that we need to understand is that when you've gone through extreme trauma, and I'm talking about layers of trauma that should be fatal happening at the same time. So, for me, I went through starvation, electric shock torture, water torture, broken bones, burns. I should have said content warning at the beginning of this, lol. Um, Infections, um, sexual assault, and more. Honestly, all at the same time. And so this produced, and to an extreme level. So what this resulted in is this like complex tangled ball of yarn where if I attempted to do one type of healing modality, it may actually be extremely detrimental to some of the other traumas that I have. So, for example, if I was trying to cure the infections that I was left with after being experimented on and injected with infections, um, one of the most obvious ways to combat digestive infections is fasting. I still cannot do a prolonged fast because I'm still suffering the effects of extended starvation. And so your regular fasting protocols would not work for me because those two traumas were fatally intertwined. I could have died if I had done it wrong. But one thing that I found after experimenting, because no one is there to help me, because who's going to believe all of this stuff that happened to me? Um, One of the things that really worked for me was dry fasting. Dry fasting until 3 p.m. every day. Um, Started to help both my infections, my digestive system, and actually the starvation as well. But I had to get to a certain level of healing first before I could even introduce dry fasting. And so this video is going to be all about figuring out how to map someone's intertwined fatal traumas and figure out where to, like, what are the cycles of healing that occur over time so that you know when to input certain therapies to assist the natural healing cycles of the body so that the extreme trauma, extreme torture survivor will not pass away and will not be negatively affected. And they'll just kind of follow the natural flow of healing of their own body. Because from what I've seen in my own body, it is actually, it's doing the thing. Even though I suffered all of these things, my body actually knows what to do. And even if I hadn't intervened with any of the therapies that I've tried, my body would have eventually gotten there, which is fucking amazing. Just W's in the chat for our bodies and what they can do. So let's begin by mapping out the 3 cycles that I have been through. And I want you guys to see how my body has naturally responded to these traumas over time. So the first cycle I went through was, um, let me go to the actual page itself. All right. The first cycle I went through was immune system, starvation, digestive issues number one, because the digestive issues I've had are complex and the healing has come in waves. And so this had to do with internal bleeding. Yeah, trigger warning for every possible thing you can think of. Um, Skin issues and hair fall. Okay, so to give you a picture of what was going on, this was happening in the first like 2 to 3 years of my recovery. I escaped my abusive situation when I was around 21 years old. And at that time, I was in a, like, I was existing in a trance state. That was my main MO. I was not here at all, totally operating on instinct. And that's probably what kept me alive, is just letting my body totally drive. Of course, that led to like a lot of unhealthy seeming behaviors, but again, like my body is a finely tuned machine, as all of ours are, and it's constantly doing calculus every single second. What is the most optimal behavior to do in this moment to keep us alive? And I believe that that's what it was doing, because obviously I'm still here. So I was in college. I was moving every 6 months to a year, and trying to make sure that the family of origin, the cult people, the government people that were experimenting on me could not find me. So I was moving around a lot, and the fog in my brain that had protected me, the dissociative amnesia, was beginning to start the healing process. So it was lifting a little bit, and so all of these injuries started coming to the surface. And so I think my body started to categorize, like, okay, what what can I sort of put off, and what do I need to address right now? And so, actually, some of the more serious injuries, like broken bones, didn't even appear until cycle number three. So, I was not even aware that I had broken bones until very, very recently. So, it's really interesting how the body decided to start with these four issues first. So, with immune system, I was getting sick about twice a week. Um, yeah, maybe like, yeah, once or twice a week for about 2 to 3 days. I was violently ill, like like low grade fevers. My nostrils were totally blocked up, couldn't breathe at all, and coughing and sneezing, and generally like I had the flu. And so it was cycling through all of these infections that were in my body and trying to heal them. Of course, I didn't know what the fuck was going on. I just thought I was going crazy at the time, but I recognize it now. It was fighting all those infections. I was also becoming aware of the effects of starvation. So I had episodes of what my mother would call low blood sugar, which was basically just my body going through cycles of, addressing the fact that I was starving and then shutting down again. So with all of these things, everything is fractal. So each cycle has periods of being turned on and turned off. And the body has the ability to do that. So a certain injury can be put on the back burner so that another injury can be taken care of. It's amazing. It's magical. It's almost like the effects of the injury are suppressed when the cycle is turned off, and another an issue can be, addressed within the cycle. Or it's not necessarily that the whole cycle is on and off. It's that the contents of the cycle, one by one, are turned on and then off, on and then off, on and then off. Kind of like the way that a computer processes binary code. We Immune system has a cycle of like, you know, twice a week it's turned on and then off. And then the starvation had a cycle of every day, and it would be turned on around 3 to 4 p.m. And that's when I would start to feel like I'm starving, I'm dying, and then I would cram food into my mouth. And then the bleeding. So digestion cycle number one was I was experiencing severe bleeding with my digestive system. You can imagine how that would go. And I had been diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, but you know, if you know me, and you may know me, I don't take that. Like, I don't take somebody saying, oh, it's just this medical thing that's happening, when I know that I've been through shit. And so, um, and I'm glad I did, because that symptom is now healed. It's not something I'm gonna have ever again. And so I would be bleeding for a few days, and then I wouldn't be bleeding for a few days. Bleeding for a few days, not bleeding for a few days. Same with skin issues. I had really bad eczema all over my body for most of my childhood. And then in cycle number 1, which was about 2 to 3 years, the eczema would flare and then go down, flare and then go down. And then eventually by the 3-year mark, I no longer really have eczema. But the eczema would actually come back in cycle 3 to be cycled through again. Not as bad this time. I only have it like on my wrist and on like this arm right here. So that's interesting as well. But in cycle number 2, eczema was totally gone. And then hair fall. Yeah, so my hair was super, super thin. My hair and my nails would not grow. They would split really easily. And that cycled for a little bit in cycle 1. And then in cycle 2, it began to seriously repair. And then in cycle 3, it's coming back again. So at a lesser degree. So that's really interesting. It's like it skipped a couple of years and now it's coming back again for multiple issues. I'll probably have to do another video on that once I've had a couple more years of recovery to see why that happens. Okay, so the coping mechanisms that were used during cycle 1 were an extreme fawn response. So I had no boundaries back then. So my psychological evolution kind of mirrored my physical healing as well. But I think the fawn response also probably kept me safer, because it made sure that I wasn't getting as hurt as I probably could be with a body this broken. Like involuntary eating. Like I would get that super, super head fuzzy warning sign kind of feeling, and then I would have to eat immediately. Eating involuntarily. And I would usually eat peanut butter and potato chips, so like super high calorie foods. And I also do think that saved my life. For the effects of starvation, I was naturally eating I think they call it a starvation diet, where you can't just put somebody who's been starving on a regular diet. It's very specific. It's like peanut butter, chickpeas, um, a small amount of probiotic, and like rice and apples. And that's exactly what I did without even studying it. And it was only later that I realized my body had chosen those foods because it knew what to do. Crazy. And so, okay, I was eating a starvation diet, fixing my metabolism from having starved for so long, and it worked. I can eat normally now. But at the time, I would have periods of time where I felt like I was starving, and I would just like eat and eat and eat and eat. Okay, so yeah, coping. Those are the coping mechanisms, and um, yeah, so that pretty much describes cycle number 1. It was hell. It was absolute hell. It Things still are really bad. No longer, I'm nowhere near the at the end of my journey, but it was extremely bad in cycle number 1. So moving on to cycle number 2, I had been out of college for a little bit, and I was teaching the SAT online. I could barely hold down a job. I think this crossed into my first two engineering jobs as well. Both of those only lasted like 6 months. The first one wasn't even no, the first one wasn't even a month, and then the second one was 6 months. Um, and so uh, the symptoms that cycle number two involved were blood sugar. 'Cause my blood sugar would wildly fluctuate. Digestion number two. And digestion number two involved diarrhea versus constipation. So at this point in my life, the bleeding had stopped. So when I was 25, I ended up taking a course of antibiotics, and that, like, in combination with a protocol that I naturally developed, my body knew what to do, which was taking very small amounts of probiotic and um, alternating two different types of yogurt drinks, and also following it with a very gentle flush of oregano, which would kill the microorganisms. The bleeding completely stopped. And so age 25 is when that completely stopped. Cycle two, I would say, began probably about a year before that. So kind of a year on either side of 25. And at that point, my digestion was like, okay, bet we have solved the bleeding issue. Now we're going to work on how the other issues with digestion. So I would cycle between diarrhea and constipation for about 2 to 3 years. And okay, after that was internal scar tissue. I was again moving around a lot, functionally homeless, and it was still bad. Not as bad as cycle number one, but still really bad. Internal scar tissue. So, I mean, it's going to be hard to explain how I got the internal scar tissue, but you can probably imagine there was a lot of violence going on. And so I ended up getting a no needle acupuncture session. And this lady was like really, really good at dealing with internal scar tissue, because she would use a device that sent electricity through two. They looked like pens, but they would send electricity back and forth, kind of like this. And I actually felt a lot of that scar tissue melting away. And I continued that work once I'd finished with her, because I knew I couldn't afford 40, 50 sessions with her. Um, I actually started learning energy work around that time, and I incorporated that into my energy work practice. And that's been super, super effective. I have a couple of videos on my TikTok about scar tissue if you want to go check that out. So the awareness of the scar tissue came into being in cycle number two. And my body was like, it's time for us to heal this. And so I felt the pain, I felt the tightness, and eventually found my way into these healing modalities. And then the last thing to heal, and honestly, like, there's more that goes into these cycles, but I just wanted to give you guys an overview. It's good enough. So the last thing is muscle unguarding. So the best way I can describe this is when you've been through prolonged torture, your muscles tense up. And I didn't even realize that my muscles were super tense until they started letting go. And it was a feeling like it's like electric shocks through your body, or running your skin over a cheese grater. Is just so painful. And my body was like, okay, it's time for us to finally let go of all that tension. And that would happen like once a week for about 6 months. Very painful, very scary. And then, oh, there's another one, which is genital healing. So for a long time, because of the sexual assault, I found it very difficult to use the bathroom, and I also like could not have sex without extreme pain. And so, of course, my body was like, "All right, it's time for us to heal this stuff." And I finally, it also felt like my organs down there were like not attached to my body, like the tendons and stuff were just ripped. So my body started healing that, and I no longer feel like my organs are being ripped away from my body, which is good. And I no longer feel like I'm burning all the time. Thank you, body. So the state that I was in during cycle number 2 was a dissociative state, and I had a lot of near death experiences during this time. So the difference between a trance state and a dissociative state is that dissociative states I would categorize as like a break from being here consciously. In a trance state, I was not here at all. In a dissociative state, it's like a shift, and it's like I can't function during that time. So it's not no functioning as if I'm catatonic, which is what's been happening in cycle number 3. It's like catatonic light. So you can see actually how the healing cycles are getting more and more like I'm regressing more and more. So it actually felt like I was sliding backwards in my healing, but the more and more incapacitated I became during these healing times, the more it actually tells me that I'm progressing, if that makes sense. So dissociative states started happening, and I also had many near death experiences. I can't explain why my body would think that that's necessary to heal, like bringing me to the point of death and then coming back. But my blood pressure would drop really low. I actually ended up in the hospital a few months ago, when I took an edible, and like my blood pressure dropped really low and I almost died. But the body does what the body is going to do. And I think it really has to do with going, like, getting to a point where I'm not doing anything. I think that's what my body's been trying to say. Like, stop doing things so that I can use all of my energy to heal. So that's why I think the NDEs were actually necessary for me to heal. So going to the coping skills that I used in cycle number 2, and the coping skills from cycle number 1 had dropped away by this point because I didn't need them anymore. I had healed. Those coping skills were just to, cover up the trauma and make sure I didn't die. So the new coping skills that arose, or well, they were kind of already there in cycle number 2, but they were kind of uncovered in cycle number 2. I'm sorry, they were already there in cycle number 1, but once the fawn response and eating involuntarily kind of died away, now the spotlight is kind of focusing on these next unhealthy coping mechanisms so that they could eventually follow it. So these coping mechanisms were porn and sex. And yes, I did say that I felt like I was burning, and I still had to resort to this coping mechanism anyway. Hasn't been fun. Overeating. So that this is different actually from the involuntary eating. So with the involuntary eating, I was specifically going to high calorie foods to stop myself from starving to death. But I wasn't even capable of eating that much because I was so inflamed. So this transition to just overeating in general, just stuffing as much as I could into my system, always having meals ready. And even then, people would comment that like I wasn't eating anything. It was just overeating for me because I'd never eaten that much in my life. But it was overeating and restriction. Because when I overate, I felt like my organs were just like breaking because they were so weak. And so I would follow that with periods of restriction, which would mean, you know, trying to push my intermittent fasting a little bit longer, and occasionally trying to do a multi-day fast, which did not work. And I do not recommend that for somebody who's gone through starvation. But, I've done a lot of trial and error, and hopefully you don't have to do trial and error because I've done it. um, okay, and over exercising, which is kind of hilarious because like knowing now how broken my body is and how much it needs to heal, it's hilarious that I tried, and kind of inspiring. Like, good for you that you like. My willpower is just off the charts, but I felt this strong desire to prove that I'm strong because everything in my body was telling me you're weak, um, and you'll never be as good as everybody else. So I tried really hard. I failed, but I tried. So these coping mechanisms eventually fell away. And actually, going back to the porn and sex stuff, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was using my sexual energy to basically create an energetic block on my injuries. So it was actually a very, very sophisticated way to keep my body in stasis until it had enough healing. And actually, I'm no longer addicted to that coping mechanism because my body is healed enough. And after a point, I got the signal from my body like, you don't have to do this anymore. And that has been super liberating. Okay, so that lasted about 2 to 3 years, and then cycle number 3, which is what I'm in right now, involved healing repressed memories, bringing them to the surface. So cycle number 3, I would say, started about like 4 or 5 months ago. So at this point, I'm starting to remember that yes, I have been on MK Ultra, and I've been experimented on by the government. I'm a survivor of human trafficking. I have, broken bones, and that's the second thing that started healing. I did not have an awareness that I had broken bones, even though I actually re-broke my wrist and my ankle multiple times. But mind control had been placed on me when I was a kid, and the mind control was basically a command that said, "You have never broken a bone before in your life." And so I did not understand that I had broken bones. It just didn't connect. So in cycle number 3, I have come into awareness that I have broken bones that have not healed correctly. It's very painful. Digestion number 3. This involves okay, so this is great. Like, this is such an accomplishment because now in digestion number 3, I'm cycling between healthy stool and diarrhea. And the vast majority of the time, my digestion is healthy. It's still painful. I still can feel lacerations and injuries as the food is digesting through my system, but it's a lot better now. Things aren't ripping and tearing, and I seem to be absorbing better because I don't feel like I'm starving anymore. And then lastly is muscle weakness. So yeah, things are starting to look up. Again, it feels a little bit like I'm backsliding, but that's when I know that things are working out because I didn't realize that my muscles were so weak. And now I do. And so the repair process is chugging along, and eventually my muscles are going to be rehabilitated. Okay, so this. Okay, so the state that I was in, or am in currently in cycle number 3, is catatonia. Oops. Catatonic states. And finally crying. I have not really been able to cry before this. Like, I would try to force myself to cry. Like, I would watch sad videos and stuff. But oh my god, it's excuse me. Um, I would, yeah, I would try to force myself to cry, and I would achieve crying sometimes, but it was not. It didn't feel like a full release. Like, it wasn't super sobbing like you would expect for somebody who's gone through horrific trauma. I can do that now. Whenever I'm in a safe space, there's somebody holding space for me, and I feel like I can be loud and just let out the sounds I need to. I have been cathartically crying. That's really, really big. So, the coping mechanisms associated with cycle 3 are actually, there are none. And that's also freaking huge. I can actually say that there are no behaviors that are addictive right now. Um, Another one that I should put in cycle number 2 actually is caffeine. So drinking black tea was functioning as a suppressive coping mechanism. So it doesn't have to even be like your traditional addictions. It can be any process that is functioning as a suppressive coping mechanism to help your body heal. So I don't drink caffeinated black tea anymore. And it was almost like spirit, the universe, was leading me to gently take away all of these different coping mechanisms. And so in cycle number 3, I feel like I'm fully in control of my actions. Like, what the fuck? Never thought I'd get here. So in future cycles, it may become apparent to me that other behaviors that I don't realize are coping mechanisms right now, it could come out that, oh, this was actually a coping mechanism. But at this moment, I feel like I'm pretty clear. So this cycle number 3 kind of started when I started my last job, which was an engineering job. I was making significant money for the first time in my life. I moved into my own apartment, was living alone, so I wasn't triggered by anybody at all. I could, when I'm at home, I could start wearing clothes that did not cause me extreme pain because I had so much injury to my body that even wearing like pants, anything constricting my middle was excruciating. And so I could wear like, that's why I wear this fucking caftan in all my videos, because it is the least painful for me to wear. So I could do that. I could control my eating habits entirely. And I was basically the safest I have ever been in my life. And so my body was like, okay, cool. We're going to accelerate the healing process. And I slowly took away my coping mechanisms, and beneath those were the memories. The memories just put so much into context for me. And I feel like cycle number 3 has been the most productive of all of the healing cycles so far. Okay, so that's what healing has looked like for me. And I also want to give you guys a little bit of an idea of how to support these healing cycles. Everything I've talked about so far has just been about the body doing its thing. This is with no interventions whatsoever. If you leave the body to do its thing, it'll get there eventually. It knows exactly what to do. So, the way to accelerate the healing process is to actually go with the flow of the body's natural cycles of healing. So, let me clear this out. And so now we're going to talk about how to support and accelerate these healing cycles. That was fucking terrible. Okay. Number one, most important, is energy work. Apparently, I cannot spell it all. Energy work at all stages. Energy work is the most gentle, the most powerful, and the most necessary healing modality out of everything. Um, you can do it at every stage. It will support everything. And all you have to do is like become, if you're a human being with an electromagnetic spectrum, you are an energy healer. So you can do this yourself. You can also get help from energy workers like myself. Um, but be careful with who you choose to work with yourself, because people can do harm with energy work. So make sure you vet them. Make sure that they're not gonna siphon your energy. But once you find someone trustworthy or train yourself, this is going to be so helpful for accelerating this work. Especially for scar tissue and broken bones, energy work is really good. It'll also quantum leap you into your highest timeline. Second is to allow all catatonic states. So whenever you feel super depressed, or you feel like your functionality of your body is just dropping away, and all you want to do is just lie on the couch and just stare at the wall, you must allow that to occur, because that is when the deep states of healing are happening. Your body's basically shutting down all your functions across the board and directing all of its energy into healing the injuries, the severe injuries. So make sure to arrange your life around the fact that these catatonic states are going to happen. If at all possible, if you have support that can allow you to not work or to have very sporadic bouts of work, that's going to be really great for you. If you're like me, I could not do that, but I manifested a way of working that would allow me to work for very like concentrated periods of time, like kind of like contract work, and then allow for me to take months or weeks off if I needed it. And so, yeah, allow those catatonic states. Third is create an environment where working is not necessary and totally flexible. I just said that, but I'm going to write it down anyway. Create an environment. I get ahead of myself sometimes. Because if you think about it, working is exchanging your time and energy for money. And I mean, this is a whole other topic, but heading into 5D Earth, the new Earth, we won't have to exchange our time and energy for money. We just have to flow with it. And so working definitely impedes the healing process, obviously. And obviously, it's easier said than done. So be gentle with yourself. Just ask the universe to provide you with a way to do this. And number 4 is keep track of your symptoms very loosely. You're gonna see the cycles like we just talked about emerge distinctly, but it may take some time to be able to see them emerge. So just kind of every couple months, just write down in a journal what your symptoms are and what your body is doing. And then over time, over a few years, you're going to start to see, oh, the past 2 years have been a cycle. Now I've healed that. And now I'm moving into another cycle. And so that's a really nice way for you to keep track of the healing process and keep hope, because this can be really demoralizing when you're dealing with this level of destruction of your body. But when you can take a step back and see, oh, things are actually moving, it's really nice. It gives you a sense of accomplishment too. And then lastly is allow your coping mechanisms to fall away naturally. This is in direct opposition to the generally accepted way to attack addictions. We're not going after the addictions or coping mechanisms as the problem itself. They're actually very helpful in this case. So get in touch with your natural body rhythms, and then when your body tells you, okay, it's time to let this go, it's actually going to be easy to let it go. But, rely on that timing. The timing is very important. And it just makes things easier. So don't be too hard on yourself if you can't stop doing something. That just means it's not time yet. Just keep checking in with yourself. Okay. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that it gives you a good overview of what the cycles of healing for extreme torture trauma can look like and how it is actually possible to make a full recovery. It's just going to take time. It's going to take an awareness that there are patterns and there is order to the way that you're healing from these things. All is not lost. Even if you've been through the worst of the worst, you can make a full recovery, and I'm proof of that. I'm alive. I'm getting better and better every day, and I'm going to keep updating you guys on how that goes. And yeah, I hope this brings you some hope. So stay connected. Um, take care of yourself, love yourself, and remember that this was not your fault. None of this was your fault. Treat yourself with compassion, and you deserve all the healing and the love in the world. See you in the next video.